I didn't know how exhausted I truly was until the night my hands paused midair, hovering over a medication tray, and I had to remind myself where I was. That moment scared me because I was good at my job, and nurses like me didn't lose focus. My name is Caroline Carter, and for most of my 20s, I lived inside a Boston hospital, not because I lacked a home, but because the hospital felt like the only place where my existence mattered. The corridors of Massachusetts General became more familiar than my own apartment, the steady rhythm of heart monitors more comforting than silence. I worked double shifts, skipped holidays, and learned how to smile through bone-deep fatigue. Healing others gave my pain a purpose, even when my own life felt stalled. 3 years before this story truly began, my father collapsed at our kitchen table, coffee still warm, heart already gone. Grief came fast, then lingered quietly, settling into corners of my life I didn't know how to clean. My mother moved south after the funeral, chasing sun and distance, leaving me behind with memories and a house that echoed. I tried love once after that, clung to it like a lifeline, but it faded slowly, politely, until we were strangers sharing space. So I chose work. Patients needed me. They didn't leave. They didn't ask who I was outside my scrubs. Then Stephen Walker was wheeled onto my floor on a cold October morning, rain streaking the windows like the city was crying with him. The chart said car accident, highway collision, multiple fractures, internal injuries, concussion. The look in his eyes said betrayal. When I stepped into his room for the first time, clipboard in hand, I felt something shift inside me, subtle but undeniable. Not attraction, not romance, just awareness. He was staring at the ceiling, jaw clenched, hands trembling just slightly. "Hi," I said gently, grounding myself in routine. "I'm Caroline. I'll be your nurse today." "Stephen," he replied, voice tight, like saying his name was proof he still belonged to his body. The first days were rough. Pain meds dulled the edges but couldn't touch the frustration. Physical therapy pushed him past comfort, and he hated every second of needing help. I did what I always did, checked vitals, adjusted drips, explained procedures, but I stayed longer than usual. I listened when he talked about his job managing construction projects, how he loved watching something broken turn solid again. "I don't know who I am if I can't move," he admitted late one night, voice barely above the hum of machines. I told him healing takes time. What I didn't say was that I knew the fear of losing yourself without warning. Night shifts have a different energy. The hospital quiets, lights dim, the city outside breathes slower. During those hours, Stephen opened up in ways patients usually didn't. He joked about the food, cursed his body, confessed how powerless he felt. I listened, steady and present, even when something inside me softened. One evening, after a brutal therapy session, he looked at me and said, "You make this place feel less like a prison." I laughed, deflected, reminded myself of boundaries. But the words stayed. Weeks passed, bones knit, strength returned, and my heart grew heavier. I noticed how his eyes searched for me when I entered, how my name sounded different when he said it. I started lying to myself, telling myself it was normal. Patients connect. Nurses care. That's it. Except it wasn't. I felt it when my shift ended and I didn't want to leave, when his room felt safer than my apartment, when silence between us felt full instead of awkward. Professional rules whispered warnings I tried to ignore. Feelings don't belong here. Love isn't allowed here. But hearts don't follow hospital policy. The night he finally stood on his own, shaky but determined, pride lit his face. He looked at me like I was part of the reason he was still standing, and that scared me more than anything. because somewhere between late nights and quiet conversations, I wasn't just caring for him anymore. I was falling. Slowly, carefully, for someone I was never supposed to love. The day Stephen took his first unassisted steps down the hall, the entire therapy team clapped, and I stood off to the side, pretending my chest wasn't breaking. I watched him move slowly, deliberately, each step a battle won. He turned toward me mid-step, a small, crooked smile tugging at his lips, and my breath caught. He looked at me like I had something to do with his progress, like I mattered beyond charts and vitals. That night, his room felt quieter than usual, shadows stretching across the walls. I sat by his bed, filling out notes, aware of every small sound. Stephen's eyes followed me, studying my face like he was memorizing it. "I don't want to leave," he admitted quietly. My heart thumped, and I swallowed, keeping my voice steady. "You will," I said, "but you'll take your strength with you." He laughed softly, bitter and tender all at once. I wish strength was enough. I reached for a towel, pretending to wipe my hands, because staying silent was easier than saying what I really felt. Days passed, discharge plans formed, and the air between us thickened with unspoken truths. On the morning he left, sunlight poured through the hospital lobby, and I felt the emptiness in my chest before I saw him. He shook my hand formally, careful, like boundaries could contain the chaos between us. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, voice thick with something that wasn't just gratitude. I nodded, trying to look professional, forcing a smile. "It's what I do." And then he was gone, leaving behind the echo of his presence in every corner of my floor. I told myself this was the cost of caring, that I had to let go. But some bonds don't break at discharge. Weeks later, sitting alone in my apartment, I stared at my phone like it might offer relief. Then it buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Caroline? It's Stephen. I hope this isn't crossing a line." My fingers trembled as I typed back, heart racing. Not at all. We started talking slowly, cautiously, about his recovery, about Boston weather, about nothing and everything. The pauses in our messages felt like breaths we weren't ready to take out loud. Months later, we met at a small diner near the harbor, sunlight catching the steam rising from our mugs of coffee. Stephen wasn't my patient anymore. He was just Stephen, and I was just Caroline. The first hug was tentative, careful, a bridge between our separate lives and the closeness we had cultivated in quiet moments. "I've missed this," he said softly, voice catching. "I have too," I admitted, letting my hands linger longer than I should. We talked for hours, laughter threading through moments of silence, stories spilling naturally. We were two people who had survived different kinds of pain, meeting at the intersection of vulnerability and trust. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. We moved slowly, deliberately, mindful of how fragile hearts can be. Stephen showed me the city through new eyes, taking me to coffee shops tucked into cobblestone streets, to bookstores with creaking floors, to the Charles River at dusk where the skyline reflected in silver water. I learned how to let myself enjoy life again, small pieces at a time. And Stephen learned how to trust someone completely, without fear of abandonment or judgment. We weren't reckless. We weren't naive. We were just careful enough to survive the past and brave enough to embrace the present. One night, after a long day walking through Beacon Hill, he turned to me, hands in his pockets, gaze steady. "I never thought I'd find this," he said, voice low, sincere. "This?" I asked, half smiling, curious. "This, someone who sees me, who stayed, even when I had nothing to offer, he admitted. I squeezed his hand, words failing, because I understood completely. Because that's what had happened in the hospital too. He had seen me there, had trusted me when I was just a nurse doing my job, and somehow we had both survived the quiet, the pain, the fear. Months later, we rented a small apartment together, close enough to the city to hear the hum of life, but quiet enough to hear our own. We decorated it with mismatched furniture, street art posters, and photographs of places we'd explored, markers of the life we were building. Every morning, I'd watch him drink his coffee, sunlight glinting off his hair, and feel the weight of gratitude in my chest. I had saved him in one way, perhaps, but he had saved me in every way that mattered. We celebrated milestones quietly, intentionally. Stephen's first full day back at work, his first run along the Charles, my first night off in months without guilt gnawing at me. Every ordinary moment felt extraordinary because it was ours. There were challenges, of course. Hospital policies had left their mark, trust had been tested, and fear sometimes crept back. But we leaned on each other, built a rhythm that didn't demand perfection. Love didn't erase past scars. It wrapped around them, gentle and persistent. One rainy evening, we sat on our tiny balcony, the city lights reflecting in puddles below, and Stephen pulled me close. "I never want to forget how far we came," he whispered. I rested my head on his shoulder, the hum of the city below blending with the quiet pulse of our shared life. "I won't," I promised. Because I knew that healing wasn't just about bones or hearts. It was about trust, about showing up, about being seen when you thought no one could. And we had seen each other, completely. By the time winter rolled in, we had our routines, our small traditions, hot chocolate after walks in the snow, Sunday mornings at the diner where we first reconnected, stolen glances during early morning commutes. Life wasn't perfect. It never is. But it was ours. And in the quiet, when the city slept and the hospital's hum was just a memory, I realized something. Sometimes, while you're busy healing someone else, you're learning how to let yourself be healed too. I had spent years patching other people together, and Stephen had taught me it was okay to let someone hold me when I needed it. Not because I was weak, but because I was human. He kissed me one night, gentle, lingering, and I felt every emotion I had buried over the years rise to the surface. "I don't ever want to take you for granted," he said softly, forehead resting against mine. "You won't," I replied, knowing it was true, because love like this doesn't come suddenly. It grows quietly, persistently, in moments of patience, in silences shared, in trust given freely. Stephen had come to me broken, scared, unsure, and I had found him again outside the hospital walls, strong, open, willing to build a life together. I realized then that the miracle wasn't just that he had healed, it was that we had both survived, that we had both been brave enough to allow it. We learned how to laugh again, how to argue without fear, how to love without conditions. Friends would ask how we did it, how a nurse and a former patient could create something real. And I'd smile, because there was no secret. It wasn't magic. It was honesty. It was showing up day after day when life was hard. It was letting someone in, fully, and trusting that they would stay. Sometimes the city felt big and overwhelming. Sometimes our past threatened to spill over into the present, but Stephen and I faced it together, and that made all the difference. One morning, I watched him leave for work, rain misting the streets, and felt the familiar pull of gratitude in my chest. He turned back at the door, waved, smiled, and I realized something. We were ordinary people living an extraordinary life. not because everything was perfect, but because we had each other. Boston mornings, hospital memories, late-night walks along the river, every moment stitched into the fabric of our story. And I finally understood. Healing someone doesn't just mend their body, it can mend a heart too. And sometimes, while you think you're giving everything to someone else, they give it back in ways you never imagined. Stephen became my calm, my mirror, my unexpected miracle, and I became his safe place, his home, the person who saw him fully, without judgment, without fear. We weren't supposed to fall in love in a hospital room, but we did, and it was real. It was messy and beautiful and terrifying and completely worth it, because sometimes love comes where you least expect it. Sometimes it comes quietly, patiently, in the spaces between heartbeats, between shifts, between pain and hope. And when it arrives, you learn something invaluable, that hearts, even when they've been broken, can beat again. That trust, even when it's been tested, can grow. That healing, in every sense, is possible. And standing there with Stephen, watching the sun rise over the Charles, I knew. We had both been saved, not just physically, not just emotionally, but completely, entirely. Because in a city full of strangers, in a hospital filled with noise, in a life that felt endlessly heavy, we had found each other, and that truly was a miracle.